Hey, how's it going? My name is Jack, and in today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to build a simple web scraper to pull down NBA player stats from basketballreference.com. We're going to be using Anthony Edwards as our player, and the reason for this video is to help automate a task that could be done manually, as you can manually pull down the regular season games that the player has played. But since we're currently in the NBA season, this is constantly going to be updated with a new row from every time a player has a game. And so you'll constantly have to go back to the site and have to add a new row when you export it as a CSV like so. So that's the main goal for this video. We're going to be using Python as our language, and we're going to be using the scrapy library. This is a great library, tons of functionality, and you can really take it to the next level. This will be a simple web scraper that'll just allow us to pull down the statistics you see here from every game, and we'll add some nice parts to it that the library provides, but we won't be getting too in depth. This is a simple tutorial just to allow you get a taste of what scrapy is like and what web scraping is all about. So let's get to it. Before we begin coding, I want to let you all know that all the code you are going to see in this tutorial is present on my GitHub. So if you already know what you're doing and you just want to get the web scraper and just start scraping various player game logs from basketballreference.com, feel free to just go to my GitHub. My GitHub is my name, and it's under SportsBot, and you'll be able to just pull the code from there. I have also a little README if you are a little bit unsure on how to set up a project. Fairly straightforward, but all the code we're going to see in the rest of this video is present on the GitHub if you want to go and grab it. Okay. In order to get started, please open up your favorite text editor to an empty folder. I'm using VS Code. I'm going to be running it with Windows Subsystem Linux 2, as I highly recommend. It just makes developing easier for software development on Windows. And I recommend you do it well. You can follow lots of great tutorials and documentation on how to set up your own Windows subsystem using Linux. It's a great resource to have as a developer on Windows. So we're going to first open up our terminal, and we're going to set up a virtual environment. As you can see, we have nothing inside of here. So in order to set up your virtual environment, you're going to type in the following command. So it's either going to be this py if you're on Windows, or Python or Python 3. Most likely going to be Python 3, as I recommend you use Python 3. And we're going to type in Python 3-m venv, and then whatever you want to call your virtual environment. We're just going to call ours venv, as that's just a kind of a great kind of universal name, as you can call any kind of virtual environment this, and you'll always kind of know what it is. Okay, so let's hit enter, and we'll watch that create it. And then just to verify it's there, we see it right there. Okay, and then what we're going to do is we're going to turn on or activate our virtual environment now. So to do that, you're going to type in source venv, because that's the name of the folder, /bin/activate. And this command is for, as I said, Linux and Mac. But if you're on Windows, you're going to type in still the same name of the directory, whatever you call it. Ours is venv. You're going to type in backslashes, and it'll be script/activate. Okay. And then what you will do is first we're going to delete this, type in the correct one since we're on Linux. And we'll see here we have our virtual environment activated since we have these parentheses here, and that's when you know you have turned on or are in your virtual environment. Okay, now that we have that set up, we're going to install scrapy. And I'm going to be using pip. So the command is just going to be install scrapy. And we'll let that run. And this will install all the necessary packages you need to use the scrapy library and allow you to take full advantage of it. Okay, and we'll be able to tell if it's installed successfully. We can type in scrapy and we'll do dash dash help. And there we go. Got some output. Got scrapy 2.11.2. And here are tons of available commands that you can use. I always recommend whenever you are learning a new library, you take advantage of just the help in the CLI to give you just kind of a general overview of what you can work with. So for us, we're going to be using the start project command here. So we're going to type in scrapy start project. We're just going to call ours tutorial. And this will create a full project for us with all the necessary files we want. Some we may not even touch, but it's just a great way to kind of get you started off in all the files you want to create your script. Okay. And as you can see, we have our folder right here. So we're going to go into that one now. And let's explore the file. So here you'll see you have a tutorial folder. You'll have an items, and this we'll touch on later, which just allows you to define different fields and names for the data you pull down in your scraper. Middleware, we probably won't touch on this at all, but if you want to, on any of these files, pipelines, they all have great links to the documentation that I highly recommend you take a look if you are unsure about something and want to know more about. And of course, you have the settings that just defines how our bot works and various things you can turn on and off. But what we really want to focus on is the spiders folder here. And this is where we're going to create our scrapers, which are called spiders. And we will do that next. Let's started with our spider that we're going to use to scrape the Anthony Edwards game log stat page. We're going to use the CLI to help us. The command we're going to use is going to be scrapy gen spider. We're just going to type in the dash dash help to show us the options that we have. Okay. As you can see here, we have a couple of different arguments that we can use that are optional, and then some other options as well. We're going to keep ours very simple. We're just going to use the scrapy gen spider. We're going to give it a name, and then we'll also include a domain. So the domain we're going to be using is the Anthony Edwards stat page that you see here. And so I'm just going to go over a brief overview on how to get here in case you are unsure or have never navigated basketballreference.com. So we're just going to start off homepage, and just one way I do it is I go to players, and you can just go straight to the player directory, and that should bring up the different names of the players. So our player's name is Anthony Edwards, so E. And then the bold ones are the ones that are active players. So as you can see here, we have Anthony Edwards. We're going to click on him, and I'll take us to his homepage. And then the URL that we want, or domain, is going to be game logs. And then the current year is currently the 2024-2025 NBA season. We're going to go here. And now we're at the domain that we want to scrape. And here are all the stats that we previously were looking at. So we're going to copy this, and then we're going to go back to our command line, and we're going to type in the following command. We're typing scrapy gen spider. Oh, my mistake. First, we want to go into the project. As you can see here, we're only on the outside. We want to go into tutorial. That way that we're directly within the folder where spiders is. So we're going to type in scrapy gen spider, and we're going to call ours MBA player, and then we're going to paste in the domain that we're going to use. So here's the one that we got from basketballreference.com, and then we're going to hit enter. Okay, we can see MBA player using template basic. As you'll be able to see, there's our spider. Go over the code that we generated using the gen spider CLI command. So the first part of our spider that you see here is name. And that is the name of the spider. We typed that in when we ran the command. And it can be anything you want, of course, but that's what you will call it when you run the spider. And the only thing that really matters when you name your spider is that it is unique. So if we create another spider in our spiders folder, it cannot be called MBA underscore player. It must be something different. And that's the only thing that matters when it comes to name. You can call it whatever you want, and it just has to be different from the other spiders. The next field is allowed domains. This is a list of strings. It is an optional field, so technically we do not need it. Of course, we can just leave it in. It's not going to hurt anyone, but it's optional, and all it is just, as you can tell by the name, domains that the spider is allowed to go to. As you can see from our next field, it is going to be a URL that is basketballreference.com. Specifically, this is the Anthony Edwards game log for the 2024 and 2025 NBA season. And obviously, it is a domain of basketballreference.com, hence why we have the allowed domains. But this start URLs field is also the list of strings, and it's just for the spider to crawl, these are the URLs it will go to and scrape data. And we can have multiple ones, but we will just keep this one for this tutorial. And the next piece of code you see here is a method called parse. And this handles the response that we have downloaded for each request that is made by the spider to scrape data. And as you can see right now, we're not doing anything, but the response parameter holds the page content that we have downloaded from the website we scraped. And so as we move farther in the video, you'll see we'll do something with response inside of this method. So that's about it for our generated spider. And we'll move farther along and get into how to actually start getting some data from the page.
Okay, now that we've gone over the code that we've generated using the gen spider scrapy command, I want to do a quick housekeeping note before we continue into exploring how we can actually scrape basketballreference.com. So inside of the settings file, you're going to go to an area and it's going to be called robots.txt underscore obey. Now this is a rule that if it enabled, the scraper, your scraper will obey the robots.txt rules, as you can see by the comment here by the auto-generated code. So what we're going to do is we're going to make this false to allow our scraper to work. And the reason we are doing this is because it will not successfully pull down the Anthony Edwards game logs if we have this set to true. So we're going to make it false. There's nothing technically wrong with this. What the robots.txt rule is let me bring up my browser, it is a rule. Here you can go read about it on Wikipedia. I just Google search robots.txt, and all it is a standard for web crawlers and bots when visiting sites. Technically, it's all, I believe, voluntary. You can read further about this on the Wikipedia page. but we're just going to make it false to allow our scraper to function properly. As always, please make sure to go read the bot policy on Sports Reference's site, because if you don't follow that one, that could land your session in jail and other issues could arise. So make sure to always follow whatever site you are scraping from, their rules. But let's get into some of the fun stuff now. Okay, now that we've done that one, a housekeeping note on the robots.txt rule in settings, let's get into actually pulling down some data from our page. So the best way to learn how to pull data using scrapy and scrape a page is to use the interactive shell. So we're going to bring up our shell again, and we're going to enter in the scrapy shell. And so in order to go into the shell, we're going to type in scrapy shell and then the URL that we want to use. So we're going to use the one that we have here, copy and paste that in, and hit enter. Okay, you can see we got a 200 response back, and we have pulled in the contents of the page. And it's inside of this response object here. So what we're going to do is now interact with the data we've pulled in. And so let's take a look at the page that we have and look at the HTML. So here we have the Anthony Edwards page. So let's go down to the data we want, which is all this good stuff here in the table. So let's inspect it. So we're going to right click and then go down to this here, inspect, and this will bring up the HTML. And so the element that we want is the table. This is an HTML element, and we want this table because this is all the data that we want. And so there are two ways to select HTML elements using scrapy. There is CSS and XPath. Now CSS, as you can imagine, uses the CSS of the page to select the data you want. We're going to use XPath because it is more powerful than just CSS, because CSS only can just navigate the structure. XPath allows you to look at the content, making it far more powerful and more fitting for scraping. And also it's not that much more complicated, you just need to learn a little bit of the syntax using XPath. And then once you have it down, it'll allow you to scrape other sports reference sites and fully utilize the scrapy library and power that it is. Okay, so let's take a look at a really great page for learning XPath. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the scrapy documentation. This is the home page. If you are unsure how to get here, just search scrapy docs and boom, you'll be right there. So I'm going to go to the tutorial, and this is a great tutorial. This is how I learned the basics of scrapy. I highly recommend you go through this one too, because it goes over some things that I probably won't touch on, since we're just focusing on simply scraping NBA player stats from sportsreference.com. So now that we're on the tutorial page, let's go to our first spider. I'm just going to use this shortcut here, and then I'm going to go to the extracting data, and then I'm going to click on this XPath intro here. Okay, so here kind of goes over some more same kind of information I spoke about, and has some great syntax on how it works. But what we want to do is I want to go to this link here, this tutorial to learn XPath through examples. This is an excellent link. I have it saved myself. I'm going to open up in a new tab, and here's the page. I'm going to hit next, and this just gives you the very basics of how XPath works. So it's simply like a file system, as you can see here. What we want to do is we want to select elements in the document. So we're going to start with a double slash and then the name of the document we want. So let's go back into the shell, and we'll use this simple starting point to pull in some info. Okay, so let's go back to VS Code, to our shell, and let's type in the following code. We're going to type in table equals response.xpath parentheses, apostrophe, slash, forward slash, forward slash, table. Then add apostrophe and close parentheses. Go ahead and hit enter, and then we can just type in table to see what we got. And we got back a bunch of stuff from the page. We got a bunch of tables that are within the page. So not exactly what we want, but it's a start. So let's try and fine tune this a little bit more so that we can get back specifically just the table on the game logs. So let's go back to the HTML on the sports reference site. And so let's take a look at what we have here on the table. So the table has an ID of PGL underscore basic. So let's take advantage of that so that we can pull in just this table. So let's go back to the tutorial as well. And if we scroll down a bit, we see this section here, attribute values. And that's exactly what we were just looking at on the HTML. We were looking at the attribute of ID. So this is exactly what we want here. We want to use @ID and then the name of the ID. So the ID, as we said, was this PGL underscore basic. So let's go back into the shell, and let's see if we can pull that in. So let's call this one, we'll call it player table. We'll type in, very similar as what we had before, response dot xpath apostrophe slash slash table, and then we're going to use that syntax that we saw on the tutorial page. So square bracket, the @ ID, and we want to get the ID of PGL underscore basic. So we're going to use the double quotes here, PGL underscore basic, close that, then close the square brackets, close the single apostrophe, and then close the parentheses. And then go ahead and enter, and let's see what we got back. Okay, and we can see we got back the selector for that table, and that's great. That's what we want. We're not getting all these different tables, we're just getting back the one table. But as you can see, we're getting back more than we want. We want to get back not the entire table, we want just the rows. We want to get back the rows of the table. So let me show you on the page. What we want is we want this. We want this info here. All these rows here is what we want to capture and pull in and save. We don't really care about the headers or the column groups or any of this other info. The table is just the starting point to tell our spider, hey, go here, grab these rows. So let's see if we can dig in a little bit deeper. And as we spoke about XPath, it's a file system. So we just have to go in a little bit, a level deeper. So let's take a look at one of these examples here. This is the A element, and then we're going to the B element within the A element. So let's take a look at our HTML. So we're in the table, and we want to get the rows. So let's close that because we don't need that. So let's look at the elements inside of the table. Here's our table. We have col group, t-head, t-body. And t-body, as we're highlighting, mousing over it, is the rows and info that we want. So let's open that up, and wonderful. Here are the rows that we want to pull in and save. So let's take a look at the path we took to get there. We were at the table, then we went to t-body, then to t-row. So as a file system, let's put that into some code and see how that works in the syntax within the shell. So let's go back to the shell, and let's see if we can make that work. So let's call this We'll call this player table 1 or 2. We'll type in response dot xpath single parentheses slash slash table, because that's where we're starting at, and we want to use the attribute of ID, as we know is called PGL underscore basic. And we'll just close that, and then we want to go one step inside of this table. So to do that, we'll do slash, just like a file system, to the T body, because that's where the T rows are. So now we're in the T body, and then we want to go to the T rows. Okay? And we'll close and the parentheses and go ahead, hit enter. Okay? Now let's see what we got back. And Yahtzee. We got back all the rows of the Anthony Edwards page. It's a little messy, but you can take a look at it, and this is all the rows of the page. I'm trying to see if I could find something to point out to make it a little bit more fine-grained, but this is what we want. This is the starting point for iterating through the page of all these rows to grab the specific data. Okay? So now that we have that, let's get into some actual coding. Okay? Okay, now let's move into our text editor, away from the shell. So now that we have an idea of what we want to do with XPath and the code we're downloading, let's write some code. So the first thing we're going to want to do is do kind of the exact same thing we were doing in the shell. So we can close the shell. We can exit out of that, close our terminal, and let's go into our parse method, and let's access this response that we're going to get. So we'll have our same variable, player underscore table equals response.xpath, parentheses, single quotes, slash slash table. As you remember, that's the element we're accessing. And it has an ID attribute. And the ID attribute is PGL underscore basic. PGL underscore basic. Oh, my mistake. Make these double quotes. There we go. And then we want to go into that table to get the T body. And then we want to get the T rows. So now we have our player table. This will be a subsection of the response that we get back from the page. So why don't we output some data now? So now that we have the player table, and we know based off of the output, it's going to be an array of rows. So let's just go through our table and let's extract the date and the points. So just create a simple for loop, and we're going to use, oh, my mistake. We are going to use a for loop. We're going to use yield, and then we're going to have a variable called date, and date is going to be this field here. So let's take a look specifically at this one. We'll inspect that. As we can see, it is a TD element, and the way we're going to access this one is by using this data stat ID attribute. Because if you look farther down, all of these cells have a data stat ID attribute. As you can see, for age, data stat is age, data stat is team ID, and so on and so on. So we're going to just get the date gain. That's what we're going to get. And I want to also point out that it is a link. As you can see here, we have an href. So we'll have to make sure to extract just the text. We don't want the link itself. And that's just one slight tweak in difference to something like points. Points is just going to be text. So let's go back into our editor and let's get the date. So the date, we're going to say row.xpath, and we're going to say // because that's how you always start within an element. The TD, because that's the element we want, and we want to get the one with the data stat attribute, and the data stat attribute that we want is the one that is called date_game. Okay, and then since we want to go into that element, we want to get the a tag, and we just want the text. We don't want the link, don't really care. You can do something else with that if you please, but for now, we're just going to just get the text. And then since date is kind of boring, let's also get the points. So let's take a look at that one too. Let's go back to the table, and we'll go to points here, and let's inspect that one. Okay, great. Very similar to the date. It's just text though, so same thing, it's a TD with a data stat ID attribute of PTS. So let's go in, very similar to what we typed in for date game, and we're going to almost type in the same stuff. And I just want to point out a really key thing is that you make sure you have this dot here. The dot tells it to just be within that certain section. If you don't have the dot, every time you run it, it will get every point of data, every cell with the data stat attribute of PTS. And we just want the specific one for that row. So make sure you include that dot. It's kind of like, when you're in terminal and you just want to say dot / the folder you're in. So very similar as last time. TD data -stat. This one was PTS. And since there's no a tag, we're just going to say text. Close everything out. Get, and we're done. Okay, save your file. And now let's run it. So let's get some output. We can clear this. And the way we're going to get some output, we're going to output just to a JSON file for now, just so that we can see if we're getting things and how, if it's correct. So to run it, we're going to use scrapy, crawl, the name of our spider. So we named ours NBA_player. And then we're going to do this field -optional O. And we're just going to call it player.json. So with this optional field, the $O will overwrite any file that is called player.json. So if you already have a player.json, it will overwrite with just the data that we're getting with this spider. If you use a lowercase o, it will append the new content to the existing file. So just so that, as we continue to add more fields within our simple spider, we're just going to use O. So let's run this. Okay, we got our player.json. Let's take a look at it. And there you go. Here is our data. As you can see, there's some that, he didn't play that game. And great, let's make sure we can just double check it. So last game he had 44 on February 10th. And yeah, that looks right. Great. Okay, so as an exercise, I am going to recommend that you code up the rest of the fields from this table. It's a bit mundane, but it's something you should do just to kind of get yourself a little bit more familiarized with how this works and how you access the different fields from this table. So feel free to take what we have in the text editor here and try to output all the different fields that you want. I'm going to just put in the rest in a moment, but it should follow a very similar pattern as this. They all should be data stat with the name of whatever their data stat is equal to. And then make sure you get the text, and if it is a link, make sure you go into the actual link, the A tag, and get the text from there. Okay, so go ahead and pause the video and write out the rest of the fields so that we can output everything from the page. Okay, now that we have all our fields filled out to get all the pieces of data from the player log table, let's run this just to make sure we're getting the correct info and nothing looks out of sorts. Type in scrapy crawl NBA player-o player.json just to override just the two fields we had previously in our JSON file. So we'll go ahead and hit enter, and that'll run. And then let's go ahead and open up the file, and we got everything we need. So let's output this in a CSV file now, because JSON's great. It's a great way to just kind of see what we're getting out, but we want to put this in a CSV so then we can use something, say Excel, or LibreOffice calculator, just so we can maybe run some simple formulas, or if you want to even create your own script with Python or other programming language, you can just do more with the CSV. So let's set that up real quick. And so we're going to go to our settings file, and we're going to go straight to the bottom, and we're going to add this format. So we're going to call it, make sure you're in all caps, feed_format. We're going to set it equal to some curly braces, and then we're going to type in format :CSV. Let's go ahead and save that, and then we can bring up our terminal again, and we'll type in the same command, scrapy crawl NBA player, but this time we're just going to call ours, we'll call it ant.csv. Oh, make sure to not forget the output flag. My mistake. And there we go. Now we have our ant CSV. Let's take a look at that. Great. Now it's coming in as comma separate variables. This is a great start. But let's take this even further, and let's have it so that we can output this in a little bit more of an organized way, just to kind of keep things a little bit more concise. And you don't have to do this. This is a great point. Right now you're grabbing the data, and you can do this with any player. You can replace that URL with your favorite player. Say you really want to get Jason Tatum's stats of his game logs of this season. Just go to his game log page and you can pull down all of his information from sportsreference.com. But let's create a pipeline so that we can just kind of do a little bit more and still output it in CSV, but just have it a little bit more organized. So let's do that. Okay, so what we're going to do to create the pipeline is we're going to use the items.py file. Items are how you structure the data when you pull it down from the page you are scraping, and then the pipeline processes those items. And items are just a key value, nothing too complicated. So let's go ahead and open up the file. There's a great link at the top of the page that allows you to go read some more documentation about items. Highly recommend it. And it's going to be a very simple process. Items are not too complicated, at least the ones we're going to create. I highly recommend you do read more about them. And we even have some great auto-generated code for us, and we're going to follow that code. The key part here is that we name them and we follow those names. So the names make sense. That's really important, because if you don't use the right names, it's just like good programming. You want to have variables that make sense when someone else looks at them, or even your own self. 6 months later, what were you doing? So let's go ahead and first code up some of the items. So what we're going to do here is we are going to go take a look at our file and look at all the different values we have. Okay, you can see we got a lot, and this is how we are going to name our items. So let's go in and create the first one. We're going to use date, and it's just going to be whatever you want to call it. We're going to call ours date because that's the date field, and it's just going to be a scrapy field. Nothing too complicated. Let's also change the name, because this is an NBA player. This is what we're pulling in, and just wanted to make more sense. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add in the rest of them. It's all going to be the same. It's just going to be a scrapy field. Nothing too exciting here. So let's go ahead and do that. And just, might just be a copy and paste job. There we go. We got all of our fields in now. So let's see how we can use this NBA player item within our spider, because that's where the real power comes from with these items, is the pipeline and the spider. Of course, you need to take the data and pass it into your spider, because we have this item, but what are we using it for? There is also one more thing I wanted to go over. Serializers are something you can do with your scrapy fields. So if you see in our CSV file, we have these @ symbols for when the team is at another team, when they are the away team, and then blanks when they're the home team. And it's not very well structured, and I don't really like that. So we're going to use a serializer within our scrapy item field, so that we can kind of just set it ourselves when we are processing the item. So within our field, we're going to create a method. We're going to call it serialize _home _away. And it'll take in a value. And it's just going to be a simple conditional. And we're just going to take a look at the value and see, does the value equal the ampersand or @ sign? And then we are just going to say, if it does, then we are going to return a capital A. And then if it doesn't, we'll return home. So just a capital H. And then now that we have that method created, we will plug it into our home and away field. And the way to do that is you just type in serialize equals and the name of the method. Make sure you type in the right one. There we go. Okay. And so that's just how you can use serializers to help you just kind of clean the data up, structure it a little bit more. They're really powerful. You can definitely do some great stuff with that. And that's just one example of how you can use serializers within your scrapy fields when you run the pipeline. So these are how you create items within scrapy. And highly recommend you do read some more. I know I mentioned this several times now, but it's really good to read documentation. So now let's get into some settings. For the pipeline, we actually don't need to do too much coding. Believe it or not, I think there's honestly no coding we'll have to do. We will have to do some setting configuration. So let's take a look just at the pipeline. So what this will do is this will take that item that we pass in, the one that we created, the NBA player item here, and we can do some kinds of handling for it, but for now, we're actually not going to do anything with this. We are going to change the name though, just to kind of make it a little bit better. I'm going to call mine NBA Player Pipeline. You can call it anything, just as long as you call it by the correct name when we go to settings. So now we're going to go to the settings and we're going to tell it to call our pipeline. So now we're in settings and look for the part here that is item pipelines. So I'm going to uncomment this, and since I called mine NBA Player Pipeline, I'm going to change this to NBA Player Pipeline. And now it will run this pipeline when I run the any of the spiders. So that's great. We have the pipeline set up now and configured with our items. Let's use NBA Player Item. That's great, but we have to do a little bit more configuration in the settings. And so let's get into that, and then we can run the CSV and have a little bit more customization. So I did forget one thing about our item after we created it. We aren't using it. So let's use our item within our spider first before we do anything with the pipeline and run it to get some output. So let's go back into our spider and let's create our item. So first we need to import it. So let's import NBA Player Item. Oh, let me take a look to make sure this is properly named. Oh, my mistake. I'm not properly importing it. So we gotta do this way. From tutorial.items import our NBA Player item. There we go. Okay, so we're importing the item. Now let's create an item. So we can just call ours player underscore item is NBA Player Item. Perfect. So now we have an NBA Player Item, and we can now use it to use those key value pairs, and the key value pairs are the ones we have here, and we can set them to the data that we're pulling in here. So the way we're going to do that is by typing in player item, and then we're going to access the field, and we're going to set it equal to the row. And that's what we'll do there, and we're going to do it for all of these. So a little bit of a tedious task, but it'll allow us to set all the fields, all the key value pairs for the player item that we have here. And let's just double check to make sure we're calling it the right field. So make sure the names are correct. So ours is date lowercase. So I'm going to go in and make sure that's lowercase. Great. We no longer need the yield. We're going to use the yield actually at the bottom here. And from here, we'll yield player item. So we can actually get rid of the yield, and we will. So let's just shift all of this over 1. And then we are going to have to get rid of all of these commas as well as set all the key value pairs. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just to kind of speed things up. You can as well. And then we will take it to the next step. All right, now that we have fast forwarded to setting all the key value pairs or key value fields within our player item, let's go ahead and place player item inside the for loop and set up our processing of the different pieces of data. And so we have them all now set to the player item field. And so make sure you have it correctly spelled with the player item field, or else that won't work. And make sure you're yielding the player item as well. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add some custom settings within our spider. And this is just a field within the spider. If you want to learn more about other types of fields, go read the documentation on spiders. There's tons of great info there. But what we're going to do is we're going to add a field here called custom settings, and let's go ahead and add that in now. And we'll go ahead and just place it just before parse, and it's going to be a dictionary. And so you can see we already have it auto-suggesting it. So go ahead and hit enter, and we will start building out some the custom settings. And what we're going to add to our custom settings is we're going to add in some feed settings on how we want things output. So we're going to put in all caps feeds. We're going to put colon, more curly braces, and then we're going to set it to what we want to be output. So in this case, we want to call our output nbaplayer.csv, and then we will set that to a format field of CSV. And then we will also include the fields that we want included in the output of our nbaplayer.csv. And the fields are going to be all these fields that we have from our NBA player item. So let's add in date, age, and team. And we're going to add in the rest in a moment. I'm going to just fast forward that part just to make things a little bit more easier so you don't have to watch me type them all out. Make sure you do put them out in the order that you prefer, because order does matter. And that's the reasoning behind these fields. If we don't include the fields part, it'll just output the data in alphabetical order. So that's why we have fields. I want it to be in the exact same order as the website. So if you take a look at the website, it's in that order of date, age, team, and then so on. So we're just going to fast forward the part of adding the fields into our player.csv file, just because no point typing them all out in front of you. And we will add them in, and then we will move further along with building out some of our output. So we'll go ahead and do that. And there we go. We got our fields. As you can see, make sure they're spelled correctly too, because if they are not spelled correctly, then there'd just be an empty row. As you can see here, make sure they all correspond to the NBA player item fields. Or else, as I said, nothing will be output. That column will be empty. Fairly easy thing to debug, but just want to make sure you have that set up when you are outputting the data. So now let's go to settings, and we're going to remove the feed format because we don't need that anymore in our custom settings. And we're going to add the following setting just to tell what kind of feed we're outputting. And we're going to set it to a format of CSV. And that just tells settings that all of the formatting we want done is of CSV. So make sure you add that in. And let's go back to our spider. And let's make sure just everything looks good. And that looks correct. Okay. And then we will run it in a moment. And let's pull up our shell to run it, and then we can see what happens. So we'll type in the usual command, scrapy crawl, the name of our spider, NBA player. And let's take a look at our file. Oh, okay. Nothing was output, so there was a problem. Let's take a look at the logs. Okay. So it looks like it does not support field FTA. Okay. Hmm. I just just reading through the logs. Okay, so it looks like this field isn't recognized. Let's take a look at our items. See if we can find it. So it looks like, oh, FT attempts, and I think we're using FTA. See, just what I was talking about. If they aren't the same, then things won't work. Now see, we have it, where is it? So we have it, we're trying to use a field called FTA that doesn't exist in player item because we called it FT attempts. So why don't we change that? We'll change it to FTA, just so it's simpler. It's for free throw attempts. And now we have that field within our player item. We can rerun the spider. And that looks like we got some data. Let's check. Perfect. We got some data. Looks like we got everything we wanted. And that looks great. And as I said, make sure you have the order in the way you want it with the columns, because that order matters with the fields. I'll put it in the exact way you ordered it into your CSV. So make sure you just have it set up the way you like it. And if not, it'll just be alphabetical. If you don't care, you don't have to include the fields, but that's it. So that'll do it for our scraper. We get the data, we organized it into CSV, output it in the order we wanted. We even got to use some items, some key values. Pipeline we touched on very briefly though, but this just scratches the surface. You can do a lot more with scrapy, far more than just pulling out some text and putting it into CSV. It's very powerful. And then just further ideas you can do with it. You can definitely scrape other parts of sports reference. As you know, there's football, there's baseball, college sports. So they all build off of this kind of format. If you go to my GitHub, I even have some spiders in my repository for other parts of the site to scrape. I believe I have some for scraping college basketball schedules, and I believe football as well. But you can do a lot more than just scrape text from sports reference sites, and I highly recommend you read more on the documentation, and I hope to see you in the next video. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed this kind of content. Thank you.